There's a belief most people who overthink carry quietly, that they do it because they are more careful than everyone else, more thorough, more aware of consequences most people never think to consider, that the analysis is a sign of intelligence, that thinking more deeply about a decision is simply what responsible people do. And that belief is very hard to argue with, because it sounds completely reasonable. But here's what the research actually shows. Overthinking isn't a thinking style, it's an anxiety response. And the inability to tell the difference between the two is exactly where it starts to cause damage. Here's how it works. When the brain perceives uncertainty as threatening, it does something instinctive. It generates more thought, more scenarios, more contingencies, more analysis. The logic underneath is simple. If I think about this enough, I'll find the answer that makes this safe. If I consider every possible outcome, nothing will catch me off guard. If I just think a little longer, the right decision will become clear. That feels like diligence. It functions like dread, because the thinking never actually resolves the uncertainty. It just produces more scenarios to think about. Psychologists call this repetitive negative thinking, a cognitive loop where the mind keeps returning to the same problem, not to solve it, but to manage the anxiety the problem produces. The loop doesn't close because it was never designed to close. It was designed to keep scanning. Because somewhere in the nervous system, stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. And here's the part most people who overthink never examine. The scenarios they generate aren't neutral analysis. They're threat-weighted. Ask someone who overthinks to imagine 10 possible outcomes of a decision. The negative ones will be more detailed, more vivid, more emotionally convincing. Not because the negative outcomes are more likely, but because the anxious brain assigns them more processing power. It's called negativity bias in threat anticipation. And in people who chronically overthink, it runs almost continuously in the background. So the person who spends 3 hours analyzing a decision they could make in 10 minutes isn't being more thorough than everyone else. They're managing fear with the tools that feel most natural to them: thought, analysis, the exhausting invisible work of trying to think their way to safety. And over time, that pattern costs something real. Decisions get delayed. Opportunities close while the analysis continues. Relationships absorb the weight of constant second-guessing. And the person at the center of it gets tired in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who doesn't experience it. Not physically tired. Tired in the way that comes from never fully landing anywhere. From always being one thought away from certainty that never quite arrives. But here's what makes this genuinely difficult. The overthinking works. Sometimes. Occasionally, the extra analysis catches something important. Occasionally, the caution prevents a real mistake. And when that happens, the pattern gets reinforced. See? The thinking helped. Keep thinking. Which is exactly how anxiety sustains itself, not through failure, through occasional unpredictable success. The same reinforcement mechanism that makes gambling addictive makes overthinking feel indispensable. So the question worth sitting with isn't whether you think carefully about important decisions. It's whether the thinking ever actually stops, whether there's a point at which your mind genuinely settles, or whether certainty always feels like just one more consideration away. Because careful thinking has an endpoint. It reaches a conclusion and rests. Anxious thinking doesn't rest. It just finds the next thing to scan. And if that distinction landed somewhere familiar, if you recognize the loop more than the conclusion, that's not a sign that you think more deeply than other people. That's anxiety, wearing the mask it's most comfortable in, and it's worth calling it what it is. If that reframe was uncomfortable, sit with it rather than thinking your way around it. This channel is interested in the psychology underneath the stories we tell ourselves about how our minds work. Subscribe if that's what you're looking for.